I'm Charlotte Reyes, 38, and I built my career in the Air Force from the ground up. No shortcuts, no handouts, just discipline and long nights. For years, I showed up for my family in every way that mattered, especially for my sister and her husband. But the night my own brother-in-law mocked my service in front of his Delta Force friend, the night he sneered that I was just a paper pusher, I made a decision that shifted everything. Have you ever been dismissed, belittled, or blindsided by someone you've supported for years? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before we get into what unfolded, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw a hard boundary after someone crossed the line, hit like and subscribe. I share real stories about standing your ground and taking your power back. What happened next might not be what you expect. I sat at my sister's dining table, watching David lean back in his chair with that look, the one I'd started noticing more often over the past few months. He was mid-story, telling Brooks about some training exercise at work, and I could see him puffing up with each sentence. Brooks sat quietly across from him, beer in hand, listening with the kind of patience that comes from years of actual combat experience. My sister Lena caught my eye from the kitchen and smiled, that tight smile I knew too well. The one that said everything was fine when it wasn't. David had always been polite enough when he and Lena first started dating. Grateful, even. He'd ask about my deployments with what seemed like genuine interest, nodding along as I carefully edited the classified parts out of my stories. Back then, he treated my career as something respectable, maybe even admirable. But something shifted after Lena, and I helped him through a rough patch with his job. Then another rough patch. Then another. Each time, I showed up covering bills, making calls, offering advice. Each time, he accepted with less gratitude and more expectation. The comments started small. Little jabs wrapped in jokes that made everyone laugh except me. Charlotte's the office type, he'd say at family gatherings. She probably has a favorite stapler. Or, Air Force paperwork is still Air Force paperwork, right? The words themselves weren't terrible. It was the tone underneath them, the edge that suggested I'd somehow taken the easy path while real men did real work. Lena would laugh it off, touching his arm gently, redirecting the conversation. She'd gotten good at that. I'd made captain 3 years ago, then major last spring. With each promotion, David's jokes got sharper. Must be nice having the government promote you automatically, he'd said at my promotion dinner, loud enough for everyone to hear. I'd smiled and changed the subject, because that's what you do at family dinners. You keep the peace. You don't make your sister choose between her husband and her sister over a handful of stupid comments. But today felt different. Brooks was here, Staff Sergeant Brooks Hale, retired Delta Force, now working security contracting with David's company. David had mentioned him obsessively for the past month, dropping his name into conversations like a credential. Brooks thinks and Brooks says, and Brooks told me about this op in Afghanistan. It was clear David had found someone he wanted to impress, someone whose approval might finally fill whatever hole had been growing in him since I kept advancing, and he kept staying exactly where he was. The kids, Jonah and Mara, were playing in the yard, their laughter drifting through the open window. I watched Lena move around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing food she'd probably been cooking since dawn. She looked tired. More tired than usual. I made a mental note to talk to her later, away from David, away from the performance she felt obligated to maintain. So Charlotte, David said suddenly, turning his attention to me. The conversation shifted with an almost audible click. You ever see daylight in that desk job? Or is it all fluorescent lights and filing cabinets? Brooks glanced at me, his expression neutral but attentive. He was reading the room, I realized. Reading me. I see plenty of daylight, I said evenly. Just usually from different time zones. David laughed, but it came out forced. Right. Important meetings. PowerPoint presentations. Someone's got to make those slides look professional. I took a sip of water, not trusting myself with anything stronger. My jaw was tight, but I kept my face relaxed. This was a skill I'd learned early in my career, how to stay calm when someone tried to provoke you, how to recognize when insecurity was masquerading as confidence. David was performing, putting on a show for Brooks, trying to establish some kind of dominance in the only space where he felt he had any power. Lena emerged from the kitchen with a platter of food. David, can you help me with the drinks? He waved her off. In a minute, babe. I'm talking to Charlotte. She set the platter down carefully, and I saw her hands tremble just slightly. That small movement told me everything. This wasn't new. This casual dismissal, this prioritizing of his ego over her needs, she'd been dealing with this for a while. I'd been deployed for 6 months last year. What had I missed? I'm just saying, David continued, leaning forward now, fully committed to whatever point he was trying to make. There's a difference between being in the military and being in the shit, you know? No offense, Charlotte, but logistics and operations planning isn't exactly door-kicking. Brooks set his beer down slowly. His eyes were on David now, and something in his posture had changed. It was subtle, a slight straightening of his spine, a sharpening of focus. I recognized it because I'd seen it before, in briefing rooms and on runways, when operators shifted from casual to alert. What exactly do you think Charlotte does? Brooks asked quietly. David shrugged, missing the warning in Brooks' tone entirely. I don't know. Communications? Support staff? She's Air Force, so probably something with computers or admin work. Important stuff, I'm sure, just not combat. I could have corrected him. I could have explained that my last 3 years had been spent coordinating special operations intelligence across multiple theaters, that Reaper 2 wasn't a random call sign, but one earned through missions I'd never discuss at a family barbecue. I could have mentioned the commendations, the classified briefings, the nights I'd stayed awake reviewing targeting packages, because someone's life depended on the accuracy of my analysis. But I didn't. Because this moment wasn't really about me. It was about David's need to diminish someone else to feel bigger. And more than that, it was about Lena, who was watching this unfold with an expression that broke my heart, resignation, mixed with embarrassment, like she'd seen this movie before and already knew how it ended. You must be proud of your sister, Brooks said to Lena, his tone conversational but deliberate. Lena nodded quickly. I am. Very proud. What's her rank now? Major, Lena said softly. 04. Brooks nodded slowly, and I saw him processing something, connecting dots I hadn't realized were visible. He looked at me again, and this time I held his gaze. There was a question there, unspoken but clear. David, oblivious to the undercurrent, reached for another beer. See? Major. That's great. Solid desk job with decent benefits. Can't beat it. The condescension in his voice was so thick I could taste it. Lena looked down at her plate. Jonah called from the backyard, asking if he could go to the neighbor's house. Lena started to get up, but David told her to sit down. He'd handle it, and then didn't move. The small power play hung in the air. I thought about all the times I'd covered for David. The rent payment when he was between jobs. The letter of recommendation I'd written for his security clearance. The nights I'd talked Lena through her doubts about their relationship, convincing her he just needed time to find his footing. I'd invested years in supporting their marriage, in supporting him, because he was family. Because Lena loved him. But watching him now, seeing how he'd built himself up by tearing me down, by tearing her down, I realized something had calcified in him. The insecurity had turned into something uglier. And I'd been too far away, too focused on my career, too willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Brooks was still watching me, waiting. David was oblivious, already moving on to another story about work. And Lena was staring at her plate like she could disappear into it. This was going to get worse before it got better. I could feel it coming, like weather rolling in over the horizon. The question was whether I'd keep my mouth shut for the sake of family peace, or whether I'd finally stop pretending these comments were harmless. The answer came easier than I expected. I was done pretending. Dinner was ready, and we all moved to the table. The kids came in reluctantly, hands washed, faces flushed from playing outside. Brooks helped Lena bring out the last of the dishes, an easy gesture that David didn't even notice. I watched my sister arrange everything just so, making sure David's plate was positioned exactly where he liked it, making sure his beer was full, making sure the salt and pepper were within reach. Small accommodations that added up to a picture I didn't like. We settled into our seats. David took his place at the head of the table, a position he'd claimed somewhere along the way, even though this was Lena's house, bought with money she'd saved long before he came into the picture. Brooks sat across from me, quiet and observant. The kids chattered about their afternoon, and for a few minutes, everything felt almost normal. Then David turned to me with that smile, the one that wasn't quite friendly but wanted to appear that way. "So Charlotte," he said, loud enough to ensure everyone was listening. "What's your call sign again?" "Stapler." The table went quiet. Jonah stopped talking mid-sentence. Lena's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I felt the weight of the question, the deliberate mockery dressed up as casual curiosity. This was the performance he'd been building toward all day, the moment he'd brought Brooks here to witness. I could have let it slide. Could have laughed it off, changed the subject, protected his ego at the expense of my dignity. It would have been easier. Safer. The path of least resistance that I'd been walking for years. Instead, I met his eyes and said, "Reaper 2. I said it quietly, without emphasis or pride. Just a statement of fact. Brooks' beer slipped slightly in his hand. He caught it before it tipped, but his entire body language shifted in that instant. His eyes locked onto me with sudden, sharp focus. He wasn't seeing David's sister-in-law anymore. He was seeing someone else entirely. David, missing every signal, laughed. "Reaper 2? What kind of call sign is that for a desk job?" Brooks set his beer down carefully. When he spoke, his voice was low and absolutely firm. "David, apologize. Now." David's laugh died in his throat. He looked at Brooks, confused, like the script had suddenly changed and no one had given him the new pages. "What?" You don't know who you're messing with," Brooks said. His tone wasn't aggressive. It was matter of fact, the way you'd tell someone they were standing too close to the edge of a cliff. "Apologize." The color drained from David's face. He looked from Brooks to me, trying to understand what had just happened, how the power dynamic had shifted so completely in the span of seconds. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Didn't move. I remained exactly as I was, still, calm, the kind of calm that comes from too many high-pressure situations where losing your composure meant people died. The kind of calm David had mistaken for weakness, because he'd never had to develop it himself. Lena was staring at me now, seeing something she hadn't seen before. Or maybe seeing something she'd always known was there, but had never witnessed directly. "Charlotte," David started, his voice already defensive. "Come on, I was just joking around." "You know I didn't mean, do you know what Reaper 2 means?" Brooks asked quietly. David's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Brooks continued, his gaze never leaving David. "It means she's been in rooms where decisions get made that you and I never hear about. It means she's coordinated operations that kept people like me alive. It means she's forgotten more about tactical intelligence than most people will ever learn." He paused. "And you've been treating her like she files paperwork." The silence was absolute. Even the kids had gone quiet, sensing something serious was happening even if they didn't understand what. I felt something crack open inside me, not anger, but clarity. This moment was revealing everything that had been building for years. David's insecurity, his need to dominate, his willingness to diminish others to feel bigger. And more painful than any of his comments about me was seeing Lena's face, seeing her realize that she'd been making excuses for this behavior, minimizing it, shouldering the burden of his ego to keep the peace. David's hands were shaking. He was still trying to process, still trying to find a way to reframe this that didn't make him the villain. "I didn't know," he said finally, weakly. "You never talk about your work, so how was I supposed to? You weren't supposed to assume," I said quietly. "You weren't supposed to belittle what you didn't understand." He looked at Lena desperately, seeking backup, seeking someone to smooth this over the way she always did. But Lena wasn't moving. She was staring at her plate, her hands folded in her lap, and I could see her shoulders trembling slightly. Brooks leaned back in his chair, the intensity draining from his posture, but his message delivered. "Special operations?" he asked me, his tone respectful now, professional. I nodded once. He nodded back, and something passed between us, a recognition, an acknowledgement of a world David had been mocking without understanding. "Explains why you didn't rise to it," Brooks said simply. Those words landed harder than David's insult. Because they were true. I hadn't risen to David's provocation not because I couldn't, but because real operators don't need to prove themselves at family dinners. Real strength is quiet. Real confidence doesn't require an audience. David pushed back from the table suddenly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need some air," he muttered, and disappeared into the kitchen. We could hear him pacing, hear the back door open and close. Lena stood slowly. "I should check on him." "No," I said gently. Let him sit with it. She looked at me, torn between old habits and new awareness. Finally, she sat back down. Brooks helped himself to more food, the gesture deliberately casual, giving everyone space to breathe. Jonah asked if he could be excused, and Lena nodded, sending both kids outside to play. Once they were gone, the three of us sat in the uncomfortable silence of aftermath. "I'm sorry," Lena said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't," I told her. "You're not the one who needs to apologize." She looked at me with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. "How long has he been like this to you?" "A while," I admitted. "But today was different. Today he meant it." Brooks cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, I didn't know he was like this. We work together, but I don't know him personally." "If I'd known, you couldn't have known," I said. "He's good at hiding it. Until he's not." We sat there, the three of us, while David remained outside and the evening light slanted through the windows. Everything had changed in the span of minutes. The careful facade David had built, the dynamic he'd established in this house, the role he'd assigned me in his narrative, all of it had shattered. And sitting there, looking at my sister's face, I realized the betrayal wasn't what David had said to me. It was seeing how long Lena had been carrying the weight of his insecurity, how she'd normalized his behavior, how she'd learned to shrink herself to make room for his ego. The betrayal was watching someone I loved accept treatment she would never have tolerated if she could see it clearly. And knowing that I'd been too far away, too busy, too willing to believe that love would be enough to smooth over the rough edges. But love wasn't enough. It never was. Not when respect was missing. After dinner dissolved into awkward cleanup and forced conversation, I found myself in the guest room Lena kept for my visits. It was decorated simply, neutral colors, clean lines, a comfortable bed that I'd slept in dozens of times over the years. Tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like a safe house, a place to regroup and assess damage. I thought about Lena. Really thought about her, pulling up memories I'd filed away without proper examination. The time she called me during a deployment, crying because David had lost another job but insisting it wasn't his fault, never his fault. The birthday dinner where he'd ignored her completely, too focused on impressing a potential client at the next table. The Christmas when she'd apologized for his mood, explaining that he felt diminished by my success, asking me to understand how hard it was for him to feel overshadowed. I'd understood then. I'd made excuses for him because I wanted my sister to be happy, because I wanted to believe that marriage was hard and patience was a virtue. But understanding someone's insecurity doesn't mean accepting their cruelty. Compassion doesn't require tolerating disrespect. When had I become the kind of person who swallowed insults for the sake of family harmony? When had I decided that my dignity was less important than everyone else's comfort? These were questions I asked junior officers when they came to me with concerns about toxic leadership. I told them that staying silent was complicity, that real loyalty meant holding people accountable, that protecting the status quo at the expense of doing what's right was the coward's path. Yet here I was, having done exactly that for years. There was a soft knock on the door. "Charlotte, come in, Lena." She entered slowly, closing the door behind her. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. She sat on the edge of the bed, and for a long moment we just existed in the quiet. "I didn't know," she said finally. "About your work. About what you actually do. I know. Most of it's classified. I can't talk about it. But I should have known you weren't just pushing papers." She looked at her hands. "I should have defended you. I should have told him to stop months ago. Why didn't you?" The question hung between us, gentle but necessary. She was silent for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Because if I admitted his comments about you were wrong, I'd have to admit his comments about me were wrong too. And I wasn't ready to do that. Her voice cracked slightly. It's easier to pretend it's all jokes. Easier to laugh it off than to acknowledge that the person you married treats you like you're less than him. My heart broke for her. "Lena, he talks over me constantly. Did you notice? At dinner, I tried to speak 3 times and he just kept going. And I let him because somewhere along the way I decided his need to be heard was more important than my need to have a voice." I moved closer, taking her hand. "That's not okay. I know. I've known for a while. But when you're in it, when you're living it every day, it's hard to see clearly. You normalize things you shouldn't normalize. You make excuses for behavior that doesn't deserve excuses." She looked at me, her eyes clear now. Watching what happened tonight, seeing how he treated you, hearing what that man said about your work, it's like someone turned the lights on in a room I'd been navigating in the dark for years. Brooks, I said. His name is Brooks. Brooks, she repeated. He's friends with David? I don't think they're friends. I think they work together and David's been trying to impress him. I paused. Brooks is the real thing. Delta Force, multiple deployments, the kind of operator who's seen things we can't imagine. David sees that and wants to absorb it somehow, like proximity to that world makes him more than he is. And you're in that world. Adjacent to it. Supporting it. But yes. Lena was quiet for a moment, processing. He's been hanging out with Brooks for about a month. That's when the comments got worse. About you, about my job, about pretty much everything. I thought he was just stressed. Stressed people don't become cruel unless the cruelty was already there. Stress just reveals it. She nodded slowly, accepting the truth of that. What do I do? It was the question I'd been dreading. Because I couldn't answer it for her. I couldn't tell her to leave or stay, couldn't map out the next steps of her life. All I could do was be honest. You do what feels right for you, I said carefully. But you don't have to tolerate disrespect. You don't have to make yourself smaller so he can feel bigger. And you don't have to decide everything tonight. Are you going to keep coming around? If he's here. Not if he doesn't change. I won't subject myself to that treatment, and I won't normalize it by pretending it's acceptable. I squeezed her hand. But I'm not abandoning you. If you need me, I'm here. Always. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling slightly. Thank you. For not backing down tonight. For finally showing him that his behavior has consequences. I should have done it sooner. Maybe. But you did it when it mattered most. We sat together for a while longer, not talking, just being present. Eventually Lena left to check on the kids, and I was alone with my thoughts again. I thought about all the deployments, all the missions, all the times I'd prioritized national security over personal relationships. I'd told myself it was necessary, that the work was important, that someone had to do it. And all of that was true. But it had also given me distance from this situation, allowed me to miss the signs that should have been obvious. David hadn't just started being disrespectful tonight. He'd been building toward this for years, testing boundaries, seeing how much he could get away with. And everyone, including me, had let him. That ended now. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to my commanding officer, letting him know I'd need a few extra days on leave. Personal situation, family matter, nothing urgent but important. He responded quickly with approval, adding a note that I should take whatever time I needed. Then I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what had unfolded and what still needed to happen. This wasn't over. This was actually just beginning. But at least now, finally, we were all facing the truth instead of dancing around it. And sometimes truth is the only foundation worth building on. Morning came with too much sunlight and not enough sleep. I heard David moving around the house early, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. He was making noise, opening cabinets too forcefully, letting doors close too hard. The audio equivalent of presence, announcing himself without having to actually face anyone. I took my time getting ready, not avoiding the inevitable but not rushing toward it either. When I finally emerged from the guest room, I found Lena in the kitchen making coffee with mechanical precision. Her eyes had that hollow look that comes from crying late into the night. Morning, I said quietly. She turned, managing a small smile. Morning. Coffee? Please. We stood there in comfortable silence while the machine burbled and hissed. Through the window I could see David in the backyard, ostensibly checking something on the fence, but really just avoiding the house. He tried to apologize last night, Lena said. After you'd gone to bed. How'd that go? Not well. He kept saying he didn't mean it, that I was overreacting, that you were taking it too personally. She poured coffee into 2 mugs. Then he got angry that I wasn't defending him. Said families are supposed to stick together. Families are supposed to respect each other. That's what I told him. She handed me a mug. He didn't like it. The back door opened and David came in, stopping short when he saw me. His face cycled through several expressions, defensiveness, embarrassment, resentment, before settling on something that was probably meant to look apologetic. Charlotte, he said. I think we need to talk. Okay. He seemed surprised I'd agreed so easily. He'd probably expected resistance, expected me to make it difficult. That's what people who avoid accountability always expect, that everyone else will be as emotionally immature as they are. Lena started to excuse herself, but I shook my head slightly. Stay. You should hear this. David looked uncomfortable with that, but didn't argue. We moved to the living room, an awkward triangle of tension with me on one end, David on the other, and Lena uncomfortably between us. Look, David started, his tone already defensive. I think things got blown out of proportion last night. I was joking around, and you weren't joking, I interrupted. You were performing for Brooks, trying to establish dominance by belittling someone you perceived as weaker. It's a common tactic among insecure men. His face flushed. I'm not insecure. Then why do you need to put others down to feel important? I don't, he stopped, recalibrating. Fine. Maybe I've been stressed lately. Work's been hard, money's tight, and you're just always so. He gestured vaguely. You're always doing well. Always moving up. Always the success story. And that bothers you. It makes me feel like shit, yeah. Is that what you want to hear? His voice rose slightly. My wife's little sister outranks actual colonels, pulls in more money than I'll probably ever make, and gets respect I have to beg for. So yeah, sometimes I make jokes because it makes me feel a little less like a failure. The honesty was unexpected. Not the sentiment. I'd figured out his insecurity months ago, but his willingness to state it plainly. Unfortunately, understanding someone's wound doesn't mean accepting their weapon. Your feelings aren't my responsibility to manage, I said quietly. I'm sorry you feel inadequate. I genuinely am. But taking that out on me, making me smaller so you can feel bigger, is not something I'm going to tolerate anymore. So what? You're just done with me? Done with this family? I'm done with the disrespect. If you can treat me with basic human decency, I'm happy to be in your life. If you can't, I won't subject myself to it. He looked at Lena desperately. Babe, tell her she's overreacting. Tell her families fight, families make up, families move on. Lena was very still, her coffee mug held between both hands like it might anchor her. When she spoke, her voice was steady but sad. I think Charlotte's right. And I think if we're being honest, it's not just her you've been disrespectful to. David's expression shifted from desperate to angry. Don't start with that. We're fine. We're not fine, David. We haven't been fine for a while. So this is what's happening? Your sister comes to visit and suddenly you're turning against me. I'm not turning against you. I'm just tired of pretending certain things are okay when they're not. He stood abruptly, his frustration boiling over. This is bullshit. You're both being dramatic. I made a couple jokes. You called her a paper pusher, Lena said, her voice sharper now. You mocked her career, her rank, her work. You dismissed years of service because your ego couldn't handle that she's successful. And you talk over me constantly, she continued, gathering momentum. You make decisions without consulting me. You dismiss my opinions. You make me feel like I'm here to serve you rather than partner with you. Charlotte's not the problem, David. Your behavior is. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. David looked genuinely shocked, like he'd never considered that his behavior might be the issue. He'd probably constructed an entire narrative where he was the victim, misunderstood and unappreciated, unfairly judged by people who didn't understand how hard his life was. I need to think, he said finally, his voice flat. I'm going to go stay with Brooks for a few days. Brooks won't let you stay with him once he knows why you're there, I said. He knows who I am now. He'll see right through whatever story you try to tell him. David's jaw tightened. He grabbed his keys from the counter and headed for the door, pausing just before leaving. I'm trying here. You both need to recognize that I'm trying. Trying isn't enough, I said. Results matter. Change matters. And I haven't seen either. He left without another word, the door closing with carefully controlled force, not quite a slam, but close enough to make his displeasure clear. Lena sat down slowly, exhaling a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. That was harder than I thought it would be. The right things usually are. What happens now? Now we wait and see if he's capable of growth, or if he just doubles down on being the victim. She nodded, looking exhausted but somehow lighter. Thank you. For not letting me smooth this over. For forcing the truth out into the open. You did that yourself. I just provided backup. We sat together in the quiet house, two sisters who'd been through different wars, but understood the same truth. Sometimes the hardest battle is the one you fight for your own dignity. And sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who make it hardest to fight. The days that followed were strange, quiet, but not peaceful, calm, but not settled. David stayed away, crashing with a coworker instead of Brooks, according to Lena. He sent occasional texts, mostly logistical questions about bills and mail, carefully avoiding any actual emotional content. Lena responded with the same neutral efficiency, creating a buffer zone of practicality where feelings couldn't intrude. I extended my leave another week. My CO was understanding, reading between the lines without requiring explanation. The Air Force had taught me many things, but one of the most valuable was how to assess when a situation needed your presence versus your absence. This situation needed me here. Brooks called me on the third day. I was surprised to see his name on my phone. I hadn't given him my number, which meant he'd done some digging. Not invasive digging, just the kind of professional networking that happens when operators recognize each other. Major Reyes, he said when I answered. Mr. Hale. Brooks is fine. There was a pause. I wanted to apologize. I brought him around you without knowing what he was like. That's on me. You couldn't have known. I should have picked up on it. The way he talked about people, the way he positioned himself, it was all there. I just didn't connect it to you because he never mentioned your rank or your work. Just that his sister-in-law was in the Air Force. He probably didn't know the details himself. I don't advertise. Yeah, I noticed. You don't carry yourself like someone who needs people to know. He sounded approving. That's how I knew. The way you stayed calm, didn't rise to it. That's operator shit. Desk jockeys don't have that kind of self-control. I smiled despite myself. Is there a reason you called, Brooks? 2 reasons. First, David tried to crash with me. I told him to get his head straight first. Second, I wanted to make sure you knew that what you do matters. The guys like me, we get the glory. But people like you, coordinating the intelligence, making sure we have what we need when we need it, you're the reason we come home. Something tight in my chest loosened slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you do. He paused. And for what it's worth, your sister seems like good people. Hope she figures out what she needs to do. Me too. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand, thinking about recognition. Not the public kind, not medals or awards, but the simple acknowledgement between professionals who understand the weight of the work. Brooks had given me that, and it mattered more than I wanted to admit. Lena was changing too, in small but noticeable ways. She stopped apologizing for things that weren't her fault. She made decisions about the house without consulting David first, rearranging furniture, planning weekend activities with the kids, choosing what to make for dinner based on what she wanted rather than what he preferred. Small acts of autonomy that she'd surrendered somewhere along the way. The kids noticed. Jonah asked why Dad wasn't home, and Lena gave him an age-appropriate version of the truth. Dad and I are working through some grown-up problems. He loves you very much, and this isn't about you. Mara, younger and less concerned with adult dynamics, just seemed happy that the house was quieter. No more sudden mood shifts, no more walking on eggshells, no more wondering if Dad would be in a good mood or a bad one. I spent the days helping around the house, playing with the kids, and having long conversations with Lena that we probably should have had years ago. We talked about our childhood, about the patterns we'd learned from watching our parents' marriage dissolve. We talked about the difference between loyalty and self-abandonment, between compromise and capitulation. I kept thinking if I was patient enough, understanding enough, supportive enough, he'd eventually feel secure, Lena said one afternoon. We were folding laundry together, a mundane task that somehow made the heavy conversation easier. I thought love could fill whatever hole was in him. It can't. He has to fill it himself. I know that now. But I wasted so much time trying. It's not wasted if you learn from it. She smiled sadly. That's a very military way of looking at failure. Failure's just data. The question is what you do with it. My phone buzzed with a message from my CO. Heard you might be up for O5 soon. Thought you'd want to know before the official announcement. I stared at the screen, processing. Lieutenant Colonel. O5. The next step in a career that had defined my adult life. I showed Lena the message. Her face lit up with genuine pride. Charlotte, that's amazing. It's just a possibility. Not confirmed yet. But still. You've earned this. She hugged me tightly. I'm so proud of you. Hearing that from her, in this moment, meant everything. Because this was what family was supposed to feel like, celebrating each other's success without resentment, supporting each other through difficulty without expecting martyrdom in return. Later that evening, after the kids were in bed, Lena and I sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, watching the stars emerge one by one. The night was cool, peaceful, the kind of quiet that feels earned rather than empty. "I think I'm going to ask him for a trial separation," Lena said suddenly. I didn't respond immediately, letting her words settle. Not divorce. Not yet. But space. Real space, where we both figure out who we are without being locked in this dynamic. She looked at me. "Does that seem fair?" "It seems honest." "And that's better than fair." "He's going to be angry." "Probably. But his anger doesn't mean you're wrong." She nodded, turning that over. "When did you get so wise about relationships? You're never in one long enough to screw it up." I laughed. "That's exactly why. I see things from the outside, where the patterns are clearer. Plus, I deal with personnel issues all day long. You'd be surprised how similar family dynamics are to unit dynamics. Same power struggles, same communication failures, same people refusing to take responsibility for their behavior. Do you ever want that? A relationship, a marriage, kids of your own. Sometimes. But I'd rather be alone than settle for someone who makes me smaller. I've seen too many people, good people, lose themselves trying to make the wrong person work. Like me. You're not lost, Lena. You're just finding your way back." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "I couldn't do this without you." "Yes, you could. You're stronger than you think." "Maybe. But it's easier with backup." We sat there until the wine was gone and the chill drove us inside. And for the first time since I'd arrived, the house felt like home, not because everything was resolved, but because the truth was finally being honored. The fight wasn't over. David would resist, the situation would get messier before it got cleaner, and there would be difficult conversations ahead. But we were done pretending. Done minimizing. Done accepting disrespect for the sake of false peace. And that, I thought as I headed to bed, was the real victory. The morning I was supposed to head back to base, David showed up unannounced. I was loading my bag into the car when his truck pulled into the driveway, parking at an angle that blocked me in. Territorial. Aggressive. Exactly the kind of move I expected. Lena was inside with the kids. I could have called her out, made this a group confrontation, but something told me this needed to happen one-on-one first. Let him say what he needed to say without an audience, without someone to perform for. He got out slowly, and I could see the toll the past week had taken. He looked tired, rumpled, like he'd been sleeping on a couch that was too short and eating food that came from gas stations. But his expression was hard, defensive, ready for a fight. "We need to talk," he said. "Okay." "Alone. We are alone." He glanced at the house. "Lena's inside." "Then talk quieter if you're worried about her hearing." He bristled at that but didn't argue. Instead, he crossed his arms and leaned against his truck, trying to project casual confidence that his body language undermined. "You think you're pretty smart, don't you?" "I think I'm competent at my job. Beyond that, I don't spend much time evaluating my intelligence. You come here, act all superior, turn my wife against me. I didn't turn Lena against you. You did that yourself." "Bullshit. We were fine before you showed up with your attitude and your rank and your need to prove you're better than everyone." I set my bag down carefully, giving myself a moment to choose my words. This was the critical moment, the point where I could escalate or de-escalate, engage or withdraw. Everything I'd learned about leadership told me that engaging with someone in full defensive mode rarely produced anything useful. But everything I knew about human nature told me that if I walked away now without addressing this, David would internalize his victimhood and make Lena's life hell. "I don't need to prove anything," I said quietly. "And I never claimed to be better than you. I just refused to accept your disrespect." One comment. I made one stupid comment about your call sign. It wasn't one comment, David. It was months of small digs, dismissive remarks, and casual contempt. The call sign thing was just the most obvious example. So I'm supposed to kiss your ass because you outrank some people? That's not how real life works, Charlotte. Real life works by treating people with basic respect regardless of their rank or position. That's actually exactly how real life works. He pushed off from the truck, his frustration mounting. You don't understand what it's like. You don't understand how it feels to work your ass off for years and still feel like you're not measuring up. To watch other people succeed while you're stuck in the same place, doing the same shit, getting nowhere. You're right. I don't know what that specific experience feels like. But I do know what it's like to work hard, to earn every advancement, to prove myself repeatedly in environments that didn't want me there. And I managed to do it without tearing other people down. That's easy to say when you're winning. It's not about winning or losing, David. It's about how you carry yourself, how you treat people, whether you have integrity when things are hard. I paused. You're intelligent. You're capable. You could have built something meaningful with your career if you weren't so busy resenting everyone else's success. He laughed bitterly. Thanks for the life coaching. Really helpful. I'm not trying to coach you. I'm trying to explain why I won't tolerate your behavior anymore. So that's it? You're just cutting me out. I'm establishing boundaries. If you can respect them, we can have a relationship. If you can't, we won't. It's that simple. And Lena makes her own decisions. I'm not telling her what to do with your marriage. I'm just not going to pretend your behavior is acceptable for the sake of keeping everyone comfortable. He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working, his hands flexing and releasing at his sides. I could see the war happening inside him, the part that wanted to take responsibility fighting against the part that needed to blame someone else for his dissatisfaction. I never meant to hurt her, he said finally, his voice lower now, less aggressive. I believe that. But intent doesn't erase impact. And right now, the impact of your behavior has been harmful to both her and me. So what do I do? How do I fix this? That's not my question to answer. But I'd suggest starting with actual accountability instead of justifications. And probably some therapy to figure out where this insecurity comes from and how to manage it without taking it out on the people around you. He looked at me like I'd suggested something radical. Therapy. Therapy. I'm not crazy. Therapy isn't for crazy people. It's for people who want to understand themselves better and make changes. But again, that's your choice to make. The front door opened and Lena stepped out, reading the situation immediately. She walked over slowly, positioning herself beside me but not quite between us. A statement of alliance. David, she said calmly. What are you doing here? I wanted to talk to Charlotte. And you? About? About fixing this. About making things right. Lena glanced at me, then back at him. How do you plan to do that? I don't know yet. But I want to try. Wanting isn't enough. What are you actually willing to do? He struggled with that, the reality of concrete change versus vague intention. I'll work on it. I'll be better. How? Lena pressed. What specific actions are you going to take? His frustration returned. I don't know, Lena. I'm not perfect. I'm trying to admit I screwed up, and you're both just hammering me with questions like I'm on trial. We're asking you to be specific because vague promises don't mean anything. You've said you'll do better before. Then nothing changes. The truth of that landed visibly. He had no response because she was right, and we all knew it. I picked up my bag. I need to get on the road. David, I hope you figure out what you need to figure out. Lena, call me later. She nodded. Drive safe. I moved toward my car and David shifted just enough to block me. That's it? You're just leaving. I've said everything I need to say. The rest is between you and Lena. Brooks said I should apologize to you properly. That I don't understand who you are or what you do. Brooks is right. So explain it to me. Help me understand. I looked at him for a long moment, seeing the genuine confusion beneath the defensiveness. He really didn't get it. He'd built an entire narrative around me being the privileged one, the one who had it easy, and now that narrative was crumbling, but he didn't have anything to replace it with. I can't explain it, David. Most of what I do is classified. What I can tell you is that when you made jokes about staplers and desk jobs, you were dismissing years of work that kept operators alive and missions successful. You were reducing something complex and difficult to a stereotype because it made you feel better about yourself. I shifted my bag. But here's the thing, I don't need you to understand my job. I just need you to respect that it matters, and to respect me as a person regardless of what I do for a living. I can do that. Then do it. Don't tell me you can. Don't promise you will. Just do it. Show Lena through your actions that you're capable of change. Show yourself. I got in my car, started the engine, and waited for him to move his truck. He stood there for another moment, then finally climbed back in and pulled out of the way. As I drove past, I saw Lena put her hand on his arm, saying something I couldn't hear. Whatever happened next was theirs to figure out. The drive back to base gave me hours to think. About David, about Lena, about the patterns we all fall into without meaning to, about how easy it is to lose yourself in someone else's narrative of who you should be. My phone rang through the car speakers. My CO's name appeared on the screen. Major Reyes. Charlotte. Got some news for you. I listened as he explained that my selection for O5 was confirmed. The promotion to lieutenant colonel would be official within the month. He congratulated me, mentioned that my performance had been exemplary, said he looked forward to seeing what I'd do with increased responsibility. After we hung up, I drove in silence for a while, letting it sink in. Another step forward in a career I'd built carefully, deliberately, through countless choices and sacrifices. I'd earned this. Whatever David or anyone else thought about desk jobs or paper pushing, I knew the truth. Brooks knew the truth. The people whose opinions actually mattered knew the truth. And that, I realized, was enough. 2 months later, I was back at Lena's house for Thanksgiving. The dynamics had shifted in subtle, but significant ways. David was there, but different. Quieter. More measured. He and Lena had done several weeks of couples counseling, and apparently he'd started individual therapy as well. I didn't know the details, that was between them, but I could see the changes in how he moved through the space. Less territorial. More considerate. When he greeted me, it was with a handshake and direct eye contact. Charlotte. Good to see you. You too, David. Congratulations on the promotion. Lena told me. Lieutenant Colonel, right? That's right. That's impressive. Really. The words were simple, but they lacked the sarcastic edge that used to accompany any acknowledgement of my career. He meant it, or at least he was trying to mean it, and that was something. Brooks was there too, invited by Lena rather than David, which told its own story about how relationships had realigned. He helped set the table, played with the kids, and treated everyone with the same easy respect that seemed to come naturally to him. Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. David still dominated conversation occasionally, but he caught himself now, redirecting to ask others' opinions. He apologized when he interrupted Lena and actually listened to her responses. Small things, but they added up to a picture of someone actively working to change rather than just promising to. After dinner, while Lena was getting the kids ready for bed, I found myself outside with Brooks and David. The night was cool, clear, peaceful in a way that felt earned rather than accidental. I owe you an apology, David said suddenly. A real one. Not the defensive bullshit I tried before. I waited, letting him find his words. I was an ass. To you, to Lena, to basically everyone because I felt inadequate and didn't know how to handle it. That's not an excuse, just the reason. And I'm sorry. Genuinely sorry. Thank you, I said simply. Brooks helped me understand what you actually do. Not the classified stuff, just the general concept. I didn't know. I should have asked instead of assumed, but I didn't because I was threatened by you. He shook his head. How stupid is that? Threatened by my wife's sister because she's good at her job. It's human, Brooks said quietly. Doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable. Therapy's been helpful, David continued. Turns out I have some shit to work through about my dad, about feeling like I never measured up, about defining my worth through comparison to others. Classic stuff, apparently. He managed a self-deprecating smile. Who knew? Most people, I said, but not unkindly. Most people have something they're working through. Yeah, well, I'm working on it now. Actually working on it, not just saying I will. Brooks raised his beer. That's all anyone can ask. We stood there in comfortable silence for a while, 3 people who'd been at the center of a small storm that had changed everyone it touched. Not destroyed, just changed. Reshaped into something healthier, more honest. Lena came out a while later, slipping her hand into David's. He squeezed back, and I saw something pass between them, not the desperate grasping of people afraid to be alone, but the quiet acknowledgement of people choosing to stay and do the work. Kids are down, she said. Finally. They get more energetic every year, David said. It's exhausting. It's wonderful, Lena corrected gently. It's both, he agreed, and she smiled. Later, after Brooks left and David was cleaning up the kitchen, Lena and I sat together on the porch like we had months before. But this time the weight was different. Lighter. Thank you, she said, for not letting me stay in that pattern. You're the one who chose to change it. Because you showed me I could. Because you didn't accept the unacceptable and you didn't make excuses for it. Is it better? With David. She considered the question carefully. It's different. More honest. More equal. He still slips sometimes, old habits coming back, but he catches himself. And when I point it out, he actually listens instead of getting defensive. She paused. I don't know if we'll make it long term. But for now, we're both trying to build something healthier than what we had. That's all you can do. Try and reassess and try again. What about you? How's life as Lieutenant Colonel Reyes? Busy. Challenging. Good. I smiled. I like the responsibility. I like knowing that the decisions I make impact real operations, real people. It feels meaningful. I'm so proud of you, Lena said, her voice thick with emotion. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. What you do, who you are, it matters. And I'm sorry I didn't defend that better when David was being an ass. You defend it now. That's what counts. We sat together until the cold drove us inside, two sisters who'd navigated through difficulty to something more solid. The relationship with David would always be complicated, too much history, too many old wounds, but it was sustainable now. Respectful. Over the next few months, as I settled into my new rank and new responsibilities, I thought often about that dinner, about the moment everything had cracked open. Not with nostalgia or regret, but with clarity. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to participate in their dysfunction. Sometimes the greatest gift is simply telling the truth and holding firm when they try to negotiate it away. Brooks and I stayed in touch, occasional messages about work, about mutual acquaintances, about the peculiar challenges of being people who operated in spaces most civilians couldn't imagine. He was good people, the real thing, and I was glad to have him as a friend. David continued his therapy, continued his work on himself. He'd never be someone I was close to, but he became someone I could respect, a man who'd faced his worst behaviors and chosen to change them. Not perfectly, not without stumbling, but authentically. Lena grew stronger, more confident. She went back to school part-time, started pursuing interests she'd set aside, became the version of herself she'd been before she'd learned to shrink. Watching that transformation was worth every difficult conversation, every moment of tension, every choice to hold boundaries instead of keeping false peace. And me? I kept moving forward. New assignments, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that quiet competence was its own form of strength. I didn't need to announce myself or demand recognition. The work spoke for itself. The results spoke for themselves. One evening, about a year after that initial confrontation, I got a message from Brooks. Just a news article about a successful special operations mission, nothing classified, just the public acknowledgement that something had gone right. His message was simple. Your fingerprints are all over this one. Well done, Reaper 2. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. He knew I'd seen it, knew I understood the acknowledgement. That was enough. Because at the end of the day, that's what mattered. Not the recognition, not the rank, not the visible markers of success. What mattered was knowing that the work was meaningful, that the sacrifices had purpose, that when it counted, I'd shown up and done what needed to be done. In family dynamics and in military operations, the principle was the same: integrity under pressure, clarity in chaos, and the courage to set boundaries even when it's uncomfortable. David had learned that the hard way. Lena had learned it through pain. And I'd learned it through years of service and one dinner conversation that had finally forced everyone to face the truth. The payoff wasn't revenge or vindication. The payoff was peace. The quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd walked toward myself instead of compromising away the parts that mattered. The relief of watching someone I loved do the same. And that was worth more than any apology David could have given, any recognition Brooks could have offered, any promotion the Air Force could have awarded. Because at the end of the day, the person you have to face in the mirror is yourself. And I could face myself clearly now, knowing I'd chosen dignity over peace, truth over comfort, boundaries over belonging. If you're choosing between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, choose yourself. Every time. The right people will respect that choice. The wrong people will show themselves out. And either way, you'll be fine. 25 years later, I stood in my sister's backyard again, but everything had changed. The house was the same. Lena had never moved, despite David suggesting it a dozen times over the years. She'd held firm on this, one of many small assertions of self that had accumulated into a marriage that actually worked. The fence David had been pretending to fix that morning decades ago had been replaced twice since then. The kids' swing set was long gone, replaced by a garden Lena tended with the same careful attention she now applied to everything in her life. I was different too. Retired now Rear Admiral Charlotte Reyes, 2 stars earned through 36 years of service that had taken me places I still couldn't discuss and given me responsibilities that had aged me in ways both visible and not. My hair was fully gray now, cut shorter than I'd worn it on active duty. The uniform was packed away except for ceremonies, replaced by civilian clothes that still felt slightly foreign even after 3 years. The occasion was Jonah's wedding. My nephew, that 8-year-old boy who'd played in this yard while adults navigated the wreckage of broken dynamics, was now 33, marrying a woman named Sarah who treated him with the kind of respect he'd learned to expect by watching his mother reclaim hers. David was grilling, a task he'd perfected over the years. At 64, he was softer around the edges, literally and figuratively. The sharp defensiveness that had defined him had been worn down by time and therapy and the simple mathematics of having to choose, over and over, between his ego and his marriage. He'd chosen the marriage more often than not, and it showed in the easy way he and Lena moved around each other now. "Admiral," he said when he saw me, grinning. He'd never dropped the title, even after I'd retired. I think he'd earned the right to use it in his own way. "David. Smells good." "Should be. I've had 25 years of practice since you last grilled me at this barbecue." The joke landed because it acknowledged the history without being weighed down by it. "How's retirement treating you?" "Strange." "Good, but strange. Turns out I don't know what to do with myself when no one's giving me intelligence briefings." "Join the club." "I retired last year." "Lena says I'm like a dog who forgot he's off leash." Lena emerged from the house carrying a tray of vegetables, and my breath caught slightly like it always did when I saw her now. Not because she'd changed dramatically, she'd aged like everyone else, lines around her eyes, gray threading through her dark hair, but because she carried herself so differently than she had that day. Straighter. Clearer. Present in a way she hadn't been when she was constantly monitoring someone else's mood. "Charlotte." She set the tray down and hugged me tightly. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it." "Where's the groom?" "Inside, having a minor panic attack about his vows. Mara's talking him down." Mara. The 6-year-old who'd been mostly oblivious to the adult drama was now 31, a clinical psychologist who'd probably been shaped more than she realized by watching her parents navigate crisis into health. She'd never married, focused instead on a career helping other people untangle their family dynamics. I suspected she'd witnessed enough dysfunction as a child to want to fix it professionally. Brooks arrived an hour later, walking slower now but still carrying himself with that unmistakable operator bearing. He was 65, fully gray, with a scar across his left cheek from something that had happened in the decade after we'd met. We'd stayed friends, the kind of friends who went months without talking, but picked up instantly when we did. "Admiral," he said, embracing me carefully. His back wasn't what it used to be. "Sergeant," I replied, using the rank he'd held when we met rather than the contractor title that had followed. "Heard Jonah's marrying a teacher." "Good choice. Teachers don't tolerate bullshit." Neither did his mother, once she remembered she didn't have to. We stood together watching the gathering crowd, family and friends, Jonah's college buddies, Sarah's large, extended family from Minnesota. David was holding court near the grill, telling some story that had people laughing. Not at someone else's expense this time, just a genuinely funny story about a fishing trip gone wrong. "He really did change," Brooks observed quietly. "Enough. Not completely, you can't rewrite your entire personality. But enough to make the relationship viable. That's all anyone can ask." Jonah found me before the ceremony. He looked sharp in his suit, nervous in the way grooms are supposed to be nervous, excited anticipation rather than dread. "Aunt Charlotte. Thanks for coming." "Of course. You okay?" "Yeah. Just weird, you know? Becoming a husband. Wondering if I'll be any good at it." I looked at him carefully, seeing traces of both his parents in his face. Lena's eyes, David's jawline, but an expression that was entirely his own. "You'll be good at it because you've seen what not to do and what to do. You've watched your parents work through hard things instead of running from them." That's better education than most people get. Did you ever want this? Marriage, family? Sometimes. But I wanted my career more, and I wasn't willing to compromise either one by doing both halfway. That was the right choice for me. He nodded, absorbing that. Mom says you saved their marriage. Your mom saved her marriage. I just refused to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. Same thing, kind of. Not really. But I'll take the credit if it makes you feel better. He laughed, hugged me, then went to find his bride. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt. Sarah's vows included a promise to never diminish you to feel bigger myself, and I saw Lena reach for David's hand, saw him squeeze back with what looked like gratitude. They'd built something real from the wreckage of what they'd had. Not perfect, but honest. At the reception, I found myself at a table with Brooks, Lena, and David. Mara joined us after her maid of honor duties were complete, looking exhausted but happy. Remember that dinner? David said suddenly. 25 years ago? Which one? Lena asked, though we all knew. The one where I was the world's biggest ass and Brooks had to set me straight. I remember, I said carefully. I think about it a lot. How close I came to losing everything because I couldn't handle my own insecurity. He looked at me directly. I never thanked you properly. For not letting me get away with it. You thanked me about 100 times over the years. Yeah, but I mean it more now. Back then I was still mostly sorry I got caught. Now I'm sorry for who I was. The distinction mattered. Growth wasn't linear, it was spiral, circling back to the same issues at different altitudes until you finally saw them clearly. You did the work, I said. That's what mattered. We did the work, Lena corrected. Both of us. Brooks raised his glass. To doing the work. And to the people who force us to. We drank to that. Later, as the party wound down and the younger guests migrated to the dance floor, I stood at the edge of the yard looking at the stars. Same sky I'd looked at from this yard 25 years ago, but I was seeing it with different eyes now. Lena joined me, 2 glasses of wine in hand. She offered me one. What are you thinking about? She asked. How much has changed? How much hasn't? You changed everything, you know. That night. We've been over this. You changed everything. Fine. We changed everything. She smiled. But you started it. We stood in comfortable silence, 2 sisters who'd weathered different storms, but remained anchored to each other. Any regrets? Lena asked. About the career, the choices, the things you gave up? I considered the question honestly. The deployments I'd missed family for. The relationships I'd ended because they didn't fit the life I'd chosen. The quiet years after retirement, adjusting to relevance that wasn't tied to rank or responsibility. No, I said finally. I chose myself every time I had to choose. And that led me here to this moment, watching your son marry someone wonderful, standing with my sister who's genuinely happy, having built something that mattered. I paused. I'm good with my choices. Good. Because I'm grateful for them. All of them. The music drifted across the yard, something slow, romantic. David appeared, extending his hand to Lena with a small bow that was both silly and sweet. May I have this dance, Mrs. Cole? She took his hand, glancing back at me with a smile that said everything words couldn't. I watched them move together, no longer fighting for dominance or control, just 2 people who'd learned the hard way how to share space without shrinking each other. It wasn't the fairy tale. It was better, it was real. Brooks materialized beside me. You did good, Reaper 2. We all did. Yeah, but you held the line when it mattered. That was the truth of it. Not that I'd fixed everything or saved everyone, but that I'd held the line when holding it was hard. I'd chosen dignity over comfort, boundaries over false peace, truth over the easier lie. And 25 years later, standing in this backyard watching the people I loved celebrate hard-won happiness, I knew with absolute certainty it had been worth it. Every difficult conversation, every boundary defended, every moment of choosing myself. Because the alternative, the slow erosion of self, the compromise of values, the quiet acceptance of disrespect, that wasn't peace. This was peace. Earned, built, maintained through countless small choices to honor truth over comfort. And I'd choose it again, every single time. And that's how one comment, one moment of disrespect, reshaped the entire dynamic in my family. Standing up for yourself isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just finally refusing to shrink. If you've been in a similar spot, I want to hear it. Have you ever had a family member underestimate you? Did you ever have to set a boundary they didn't expect? Or have you had someone else step in and see your worth when the person closest to you didn't? Drop your story in the comments. Someone else might need to hear it. If this resonated with you, hit like, subscribe for more real stories, and share this with someone who might need a reminder that respect isn't optional. You're not alone.